Hello and happy Monday.
Hello.
Thanks for hosting.
Thank you guys for giving me this opportunity. I'm really excited about it. This was a really good read, and there's definitely some follow ups that I'm ready to get into.
Cool. I haven't read it, but I was lucky. I was fortunate enough to see it, the movie, the documentary, so that was good.
I watched the movie all over again after reading the book, and it was just like it only, of course, as everyone talks about, the movie can only give a form, like a percentage of the justice from the book. One of the things that I do is when I'm trying to get deeper into a book, I do the audio book as well as reading at the same time to kind of grasp it even more. And so when doing that, it definitely like opened my eyes to more. And a couple of the follow-ups, which I'll talk about, is a couple of his clients that were exonerated. They now have books. And there was even a book that talks about the case to help him to exonerate Johnny D or Walter McMillian. So it was really, really good. And we'll
Nice.
So it is 12 o'clock, but I'm just going to give everyone probably about until 12:03. Then we can get started. Sounds good? Hi, how are you?
Can you remind us of your name? Because I think it popped up at the start, but now you're just identified as YWCA.
Yeah, so you can call me Stasha. It's Nastasha, but Stasha is a lot easier. So just call me Stasha.
Thank you.
Really excited about talking with you guys about this book. So I'll give everyone probably, I said 12:03. Does that sound good? Okay, perfect.
So are you in the office, Tasha?
No, I'm not. I'm at home. I'm working from home today.
Okay. Do you know Vicky Hightower?
I do. I know Vicky.
She's a friend of mine.
Okay.
We go way back.
Me and Vicky have Wonder Woman in common.
Oh, is that right?
I absolutely love Wonder Woman, and so when I go in her office, I see it, and it makes me excited.
She's a good woman. My dog is about to go ballistic, so if I disappear, that's what's happening.
No worries. Can you guys see my screen? Perfect. Okay. I'm just getting set up.
I work at State Farm, and I shared this on our Yammer site because I was, we've been doing a lot for Black History Month this month, and just a lot of us had seen this movie and we were super excited about it. I was hoping to see more people join, but I'm glad we're all here.
Yeah. I think it's definitely something that can be an ongoing discussion because, like, the more you go into it and if you begin to research some of the stuff, it definitely opens your eyes to see, like, it's far beyond just the Walter McMillian case, but just like in depth, the stories that were told for many of the people that he was working with, survivors and those who were not, unfortunately, exonerated. It's definitely heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's something that it makes you want to dig further into it. So Okay, so it is 12:03. I'm just going to go over a quick presentation, not necessarily a presentation, but just some of my takeaways, just to kind of get the conversation going. And then after that, we can just dig right into it. You guys can let me know how you're feeling about some of the things that I'm reviewing. And if you want to add more to it, I'm definitely more than willing to do so. This is a book discussion. It's not about me presenting, so I'll be quick with it. Sounds good? Perfect. Okay, so this is the book Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. Three of the things that were my takeaways when it came down to this book was the systematic discrimination that I definitely want to get into, the traumatization and the victimization, sometimes re-victimization of the clients that Bryan Stevenson worked with, and then the term mercy. Because when I think of just, we also see it's justice that he's dealing with and mercy. And so looking at things from a merciful side and making sure that when we are seeking justice, we're still seeking mercy with those that we seek justice for. Okay. All right. So Bryan Stevenson was the one who established the Equal Justice Initiative, and these were some of the things that he works on when it comes down to the Equal Justice Initiative. It was the death penalty, making sure that with the facts, it's 1 in 9 people that are on death row are actually innocent. And in a lot of states, they do not compensate people for the time that they spend in jail, which is an average of over 10 years before they are exonerated. He works with children in adult prisons. In 23 states, there is no minimum age for children to be tried as an adult. He works for wrongful convictions. And so these are because of they have been convicted because of fabricated evidence, false testimonies, refusing to consider proof of innocence. So just like the Walter McMillian case, and even with the Henry case, where they wanted someone to be found guilty, and even though all of the facts did not line up, the situation was they needed basically to quiet down their towns. They needed to put someone behind bars. And it just so happened, though, those two were the ones that stuck out for wrongful convictions in the book. And then he talked about excessive punishment. These are many of the ones that he definitely fought for when it came down to young children, when it came down to victims that were re-victimized and then thrown into the system. All of that, in and out of cells, they were labeled as prisoners. And even with Walter McMillian, once he went into the nursing facility, even though a lot of people were not okay with him, that what that nurse said in that chapter was that even though he was exonerated, once you're in jail, you're considered to be a bad person. And so you put the label of prisoner or inmate on them and not understand that that label is an effect that they have to deal with long term, because a lot of times, even though you are exonerated, people can look you up in the system and they see that you were previously in jail, and there are biases that are tagged to you because of that. Thinking about the fact that there are no government benefits for those who have been convicted of crimes in many states. And in 12 states right now, people are not able to vote. So they lose their voice in the process of this as well. And then the prison conditions, overcrowded. We all know that when it comes down to prisons, we have regular prisons, but then we also have private prisons, because this is a huge moneymaker for the United States. Even though the United States is supposed to be 5% of the world's population, it's actually 25% of the prison population. So the conditions are definitely overpopulated. And this is something that it continues to be heartbreaking. Does anybody have anything to say regarding the work that Bryan Stevenson does? Okay. So one of the things that I really wanted to talk about was, what was the true crime of Walter or Johnny D. McMillian? What did he commit? And so the crime that he actually committed, it wasn't murder. That wasn't the reason why they placed him on trial. That was not the reason why they made the decision to give him life sentence or the death row. It was actually miscegenation. And so what is miscegenation? Miscegenation is basically the interracial. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that I give you the correct information. So miscegenation is basically interracial couples intertwine. And so with that being said, what the issue was with the miscegenation is a lot of people were not okay with the fact that there were interracial couples. It started as early as 1880. It started before that, but when it became an issue, it was the Pace and Cox in 1880. And so with Pace and Cox in 1880, they were actually sentenced to 2 years in jail. This was before they made the decision that if they found interracial couples, whether it was hidden marriages or just sexual relationships, they would choose to lynch them. But if we go further back, one of the things that I kind of want to bring to the light with this situation is in the slave times, a lot of owners considered their slaves to be property. And so that meant that they were able to do anything and whatever they wanted to do with their property. And that did include forcible sex. But because it is a system of power and control, this is the system that we deal with when it comes to it. When you have a free will to decide to go into an interracial relationship, that is where the problem begins to rise. A lot of people are not okay with interracial relationships back in this time. And let's be honest, to this day, some people are still not okay with this situation because it is a power and control situation. It's something that they feel like because there is a higher level when it comes down to certain races, then there are, let me slow down, I'm sorry. Because when it comes down to certain races being superior than other races, that is where their frustration lies. And what they don't want is they don't want the races to become connected. They don't want unity. They don't want it to be intertwined with races. They want continuous segregation, to continuous separation between races so they can continue to have power in the system that they previously had. So next was Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, where this was taken to the Supreme Court in Alabama. And even in the Supreme Court in Alabama, they still found that it was not constitutionally correct for there to be miscegenation. And then it wasn't until Loving in Virginia, which is 1967, that it became constitutional for race couples, interracial couples to be married without having any laws. So any laws to basically punish them for it. And so one of the things that I thought about when reading this book, and one of the things that I kind of like continue to, I guess, go back to with this situation is that Walter, his crime, the only crime that he had was that he had an affair with a white person, or with Karen Kelly, who was a white female. That was the crime that he committed. And even though it was so many different things that showed that he was not the murderer, he was not guilty of this crime, they needed to punish someone, and they were still upset that they couldn't do anything about the affair that he had with Karen Kelly, that they decided that this is the way that we're going to make him pay. Because by law, we can't make him responsible for having an affair with Karen Kelly. Does that make sense? Does anybody have anything to say regarding Walter McMillan's crime, or anything regarding some of the cases that were dealt with in this situation?
I'm just looking at some of these dates, and I was born in 1964, and to imagine that this was something that, 67 and 85 that is still happening is really well, it's shameful, but it's just, yeah, it's just really caught my attention.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. One of the things that I think about is um, if you were, um, if there was a hidden relationship, and in a hidden relationship, you had a child that was biracial, how much discrimination that couple got, but also that child got in that time frame as well. And so, even though one of the things that I always talk about when we talk about the Loving versus Virginia, this was a Caucasian male and a Black woman, right? And even though my grandmother was Black, she was very fair skinned. And my grandfather was of a darker tone. And this was around that time frame. And my grandmother used to sit in the back seat of her car while my grandfather drove her around because they did not want to be discriminated against during that time frame. And so knowing that this is something that people of color dealt with to avoid having hate crimes committed against them and things like that, this was the precaution that you had to take. But in the end, it didn't make sense. To us, it doesn't make sense, but to them, they had to find a cause for it to make sense because, again, it's that superiority inferiority issue that we're dealing with.
I would say thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important to, when you see a person that actually can relate to that from firsthand experience, it's so important to hear those stories because so many times we don't. And I think that's part of a problem that we face is that people just don't see it because it's not in their face. So thank you.
Right. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to say regarding the situation of miscegenation with McMillan or anyone else? Sorry, if you are, I don't know if you guys are putting your hands up, but if you have anything to say, if you can do just like Elaine and unmute yourself because I'm in the PowerPoint. Okay? Perfect. All right. So the next that I want to discuss, the next topic that I wanted to discuss was in the book, was talking about the souls of Black folks. And this was by W.E.B. Du Bois. And this stood out to me because it had a lot to do with what Bryan Stevenson fought, the different cases that Bryan Stevenson fought. And so I wanted to first discuss the situation that he talked about, the power of identity, when he talked about his grandmother and how his grandmother basically loved on him and told him that, he was going to be somebody. And then not only that, but then the W.E.B. Du Bois book was The Coming of John, and how it's so many people that you invest in when you see your community. Back in the day when we were growing up, it's not too much right now, and honestly it's probably because of COVID that all of us are stuck in the home. But I remember back in the day when your community was like another family to you. It wasn't necessarily you go home and you go straight in the house and you shut the door and turn the TV on, but it was like a weekend thing. And when we celebrated holidays all together. And so this was the time where community was really, really big and it was really strong. And so because of that, when you saw somebody that had something special in them, you invested in them, whether it was time, whether it was resources, however you can invest in that person that was in your community because you saw them as somebody that was going to become something. You did what you needed to do to instill that greatness in them and to help them to grow. And so when he talked about the coming of John and he compared it to kind of like his grandmother instilling in him the power of identity, but then also talking about the coming of John in the book and how the community had invested in this guy to go to college so that he can be something. And even though he slipped up, he realized I got people depending on me to be somebody great. And so because I have people depending on me to be somebody great, I'm going to give them what they're looking for. And it was tragic that it ended in him getting lynched because of the judge's son raping his sister. And so one of the things that I think about when I think about Bryan Stevenson is he sees that it's meant for him to do something great. And even though it hurts, and even though he has to put himself in harm's way, he's going to continue to strive to do something great for people that don't have a voice. And I think about even in our communities, when we were growing up, it was so many different people that were being invested in. It was so many different resources for those in the community to do something great. But because of the color of their skin, they were either put in jail, they were either not given an attorney that was able to give them an adequate fight to be able to fight the case. It was so many different things that were going on throughout me growing up in my community, as well as who Bryan Stevenson was fighting for. It's so many different people that got people to invest in them, but because of a system that held them back, they were not able to go forward. Does that make sense? And
Yes.
And so it brought me to the situation, and it brought me into the situation where the beating of the drums. Do you guys remember that in the book? When it was the guy in the wheelchair at the church, and he talked about the beating of the drums. Do you remember that? Hannah, I see you. Do you have something to say?
No, I remember.
Okay. So what I got from that and what I wanted to pull away from that is the beating of the drums for justice. The scars that we bear are not war wounds, but instead they are medals of honor. And this is what he talked about in the book, the guy in the wheelchair. And so he started to show the different scars that he had, and those were medals of honor. And so he said that when it comes to civil rights leaders, many are not acknowledged until their medals of honors are visible or death. So we think about civil rights leaders, we think about Malcolm X, we think about Martin Luther King. Those are the two big civil rights leaders, right? And how it ended up them being dead before their voices were truly heard, or before we honored them in a way that they should have been honored. And so if we can continue to beat the drums, if we can continue to cry out loud for the injustice that we deal with in the justice system, in the systematic discrimination, we're hoping that in the end, we won't have to lose anyone else to death. Does anybody have anything to say regarding this? All right, we will keep going. Okay, so what's mercy? This one was heavy for me. What's mercy? What does it mean to be broken? Bryan talked about being broken, and I'm actually going to read a couple of the things that he talked about in his chapter, Broken. He talked about Jimmy Deal and his situation. And he said when he found out that Jimmy Deal was not able to get the stand, and he was still going to be put to death, he was frustrated. Bryan Stevenson was very frustrated. And I'm going to be honest and tell you, I was frustrated too. I think I cried on it. I cried almost every chapter, but I cried on this one. And so when he talked about it, he said, he began to get angry about it. Why do we want to kill all the broken people? What's wrong with us that we think a thing that can be right? We think a thing that can't be right. And so this was heavy because it was just like, it's so true. When you think about people that are being put on death row, these are broken people. Why in the world did they have the mindset to take a life because somebody else took a life? And when you think about the other crimes, like back in the day, like many, many years ago, before real laws were created, you heard of eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth and leg for a leg and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, in today's day, if someone was to take matters into their own hand, their punishment can sometimes be worse than the person that committed the first crime. So why is it justifiable for us to be able to take the life of someone else because they committed a crime or because they killed someone? But then you have people that are getting capital punishment that did not even take a life. Just thinking of another situation in the book where there was someone who, I can't remember who it was, but there was someone who give me 1 second. Someone that was charged with aggravated assault, and because his wife left them and he died after being released from the hospital and after being taken care of for a minute, that was when the person they passed away, and then the charges got increased to death, and he was sentenced to death. And so because of that, it's just like, so it's okay for you to take my life because of this. And even thinking about the cases where no life was taken, but at the end of the day, they were still sentenced to death, or they were still charged with death row. And so he later began to say, I worked in a broken system of justice. He thought of Joe Sullivan and Trina and Antonio and Ian and dozens of other broken children who we work with and struggle to survive in prison. But this is what I want you guys to really, really let soak in. We have a choice to embrace our humanness, which means embracing our broken natures and the compassion that remains our best hope for healing. Or we can deny our brokenness, forswear compassion, and as a result, deny our own humanity. And so with this, do you feel that someone that is broken can help someone else to become whole? And how can we fix a broken system if it's not the system that is broken, but instead it's the people that are broken? So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for a second because I want to talk about this one. When it comes down to brokenness, how can we fix a system that we feel is broken?
For me, this is the hard part. It's putting action. Like, I can say that I can do things with my vote and with my money and how I treat people and how I educate myself, but I really struggle with the action part of it. I work in mental health, so I actually do work with a lot of broken people, and I know that there's the ability to heal and to help people, and that they're not the people that need to be punished the most. They've already are living, marginalized existence. So I'm really curious what other people think about how can we put things into action. We have so much momentum going right now, but as we know from history, we're not even close to getting to where we need to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Something they mentioned in the book, like in the first couple of chapters, talked about how that prisons aren't like rehabilitative. If anything, they're traumatizing and re-traumatizing. So I think about ways that we could help. And I know this is really just a systematic thing, but what if we, one, educated the public about like the re-traumatization of prison, and then the unfairness of the prisons, and then two, just like, kind of creating more of that rehabilitative, like, can mental health professionals get in there, and rehabilitate these members so that they don't go back out and reoffend whatever they were doing, or if they're innocent, that, I think there's, I can't remember what it is. There is I think it's like a coalition that helps with it, but like they go into prisons and I cannot think of it. I don't know if it was mentioned in the book or not. But it's like a coalition to help those on death row or those wrongly accused. And I can't remember specifically what it is. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with that, but I would say, yeah, at a systematic level, if we're going to break a broken system, we need to make sure that everyone is aware of the brokenness of the system first. And then we can kind of make strides forward. I don't know if that's making sense, but
It does. So can I ask a question? And only if you're comfortable. I know that we have some people from Labyrinth, we have some people from Stepping Stone and Any Lane. You said that you're in counseling, correct?
I'm in counseling, but I also work at State Farm full-time.
Okay. So just and this is just to make sure that I'm not getting too personal, but just thinking of these three groups that I know of right now and how we deal with brokenness probably on an everyday basis. Do we not? Okay. So with us dealing with brokenness on an everyday basis, another thing that I kind of want you guys to process is when he talked about it exposed his own brokenness. How real is that? When you're seeing a system that you work in and the system that you're working in, it continues to bring more people into the system and those people are broken. And so it not only shows you how broken the system is, but it exposes your brokenness. And to me, that brokenness is a passion. It becomes a passion to help others. Does that make sense? And so when I talk about exposing or when I talk about a system of brokenness and what we can do to help, it's more so on that drive. How can we push the drive within us to fix the system?
Well, for an example, like for-profit prisons, it's like, what can we do about that other than vote?
Mm-hmm.
And isn't it on Biden's agenda to I don't know what the word is, but reform the prison system or the justice system as it relates to incarceration and how severely some populations are punished as opposed to others who kind of get like just a slap on the wrist or just a nod and get off.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the issue, because when you've got a systemic problem, it's very difficult to address a systemic problem with kind of piecemeal initiatives, or even it starts to feel pretty overwhelming for an individual, just because of the hugeness of the problem. And it takes systemic change to heal systemic problems. But systemic change starts with individuals. I mean, it does start with individual actions and supporting candidates who have this as an agenda, have social justice issues and the reform of the criminal justice system as planks in their platform. I think that's important, and it does feel very overwhelming.
I agree. And it's not an answer that we're going to get today. I'm sorry, Marianne, were you going to say something?
Well, I think it gets back to some of the things that Brian said in his book. He talked from the very beginning about his grandmother said, you can't understand most of the important things from a distance. You have to get close. Mm-hmm. And so you have to put a face on it. It can't be an abstract idea. It can't be just, in principle, I'm opposed to, unjust incarceration. I think in Brian's book, he really puts a face on it. And when he talks about brokenness, he says, we're all broken. I mean, we're talking about, the broken people and the unbroken people. Well, there are no unbroken people, and I think when enough people recognize that that's true, that there's not some constitutional difference between those who are in prison and those who aren't, there's not. Those individuals, we all have our own stories, we all have our own histories. But there's nothing really that makes us, anyone different than another person in terms of their brokenness. So, and I think that's what Brian did. I think he's made a lot of systemic changes. He has been responsible, but he's done it, one case, one person at a time. And I think that's the power of his story of the book that he's written, is that he puts a face on it. He lets you know these are real life people,
If you haven't read the new Jim Crow, it's just overwhelming. I used to be a probation officer, and I think, oh my gosh, a lot of this was going on and becoming a routine and nobody even thought about it. But the author, I forget the name of the woman who wrote it, but she's a person of color and she's a judge, and it's just full of information, but it's really hard to read because the whole system is permeated with racial injustice. But it's a real eye opener and it's really interesting. I do a lot of prison ministry, and other than when there's a COVID going on, and the prisons are not designed to help people. They're designed to house them for their term and then send them out with no preparation, no new skills. If they want to, sometimes they can get some training, but the instructors in the classes may or may not show up today and may or may not teach them anything and may or may not care if they learn anything and may or may not care if they come or not. And there's very, very little job training in any of the prisons. I go primarily into women's prisons, but sometimes men's prisons as well. And they all have counselors, but it's a stigma to see your counselor. So most people don't go. And we do a lot of religious programming in a couple of prisons, and I'm very involved with that. But we get the cream of the crop. We get the people who admit what they did, are repentant for what they did, and seeking acceptance of themselves, and hopefully somewhere along the line, a feeling that other people accept them and care about them. And that's great, but we're not getting the hardcore. We're not getting them at all. So interesting. I could go on, but I won't.
I love
I
it.
did see on my news feed right before this started that the state of Virginia, I think, is about to outlaw the death penalty.
I hope
guess
Biden
that's
will
it.
do that.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice if it had happened on a federal level, wouldn't it? And then
Yes.
we
But
would
it would just be federal cases probably.
piecemeal,
So,
you know,
yeah, so
state
each
by
needs to
state.
do it too.
But yeah, I mean, it's state by state is certainly better than no states doing it.
Yeah.
One of the things I like about Illinois.
I really appreciate the notion of like that one thing at a time, or like we can only do one thing at a time. But I feel like over time that creates a big change. The little changes create the big change. And I think like, because it does feel overwhelming, but you know, we're only asked to do one thing at a time, one person at a time, one client at a time. And as we kind of move one thing at a time, just like Ryan did, where he did one client at a time, I think that over time that creates a huge difference. And I think that's, you know, how we can help and how we can be effective change makers, is that we focus on that one client and then we move on to the next one. And hopefully if we can make a difference in one person's life, we can, you know, you never know, you could really rehabilitate someone who could go on to be the next president. Like you have no idea, or a senator or someone of power. And I think that I'm kind of seeing it, you know, and that's not to say they could have a kid who could do that. You know, I mean, the effect could be, I'm trying to think of a word. There could be you know, the more we rehabilitate people, the more we heal them from the things that they've been through, the more they can be effective in helping create the change that we want to see in our world.
Well, I think that's an important point, that, you know, you may just be able to affect one life, but that person may go out and touch more, you know, if they go out and touch one, and then, you know, so, I mean, there's a
Domino effect.
thank you. I think there was a word for that. It's, you know, it's this.
I'd like to think about the life of John Lewis, who we lost just this last year. And he served plenty of time in jail. He was charged with all kinds of crimes, and he's made more of a difference in our society than, you know, certainly I will ever make, but I mean that many of us, that most people will ever make, is that, yeah, he became a governmental official, an elected official, and made significant changes through his lifetime. So, you know, it can be done. You know, he was one person. Brian Stevenson was one person, and each one of us is one person too.
And what we do, it definitely can make an impact. And so that's so important. to know what we do, it can make an impact. And even if it doesn't make an impact right now, it can later make an impact on someone else. So I am going to, it's 12:38, but I want to give you guys an opportunity to talk about anything that you want to talk about with the book discussion. I just wanted to pull in some highlights that I felt would be good to talk about when it talks about discrimination.
I read this book a few years back, and I was so impressed with it that I made notes and kept notes. And so I'm referring to those. But one of the things there were several things that really stuck with me. One is he talked about, he said, 4 institutions in American history have shaped our approach to race and justice, but remain poorly understood. One is slavery. 2 is the Reign of Terror following the collapse of Reconstruction until World War II. The 3rd is Jim Crow, legalized racial segregation and suppression of basic rights, American apartheid era. And number 4 is mass incarceration. And when you think about all of those events in our country's history, I mean, it's just a continuum of injustice, that continues today. And I think the more you know about each one of those eras in our history, the better you're able to understand how we got to where we are today. And that's the beginning to know, where do we go from here? But, there needs to be recognition that this is not a problem that was created overnight. This is part of our history from the foundations of our country.
I also think that's why, and we stress the importance of Black History Month, because like the things that you don't know, like not a lot of people know about how prevalent slavery was, the effect of it, the psychological effect. Like I feel like one of the things, like if kids were actually educated on this, what if they grew up to be civil rights fighters? Like what if they went out there and they did what they needed to do? But like, I don't feel like I was educated in school. And that made me upset. And I'm grateful that we have a month devoted to this, because I'm like, this is still a problem. Like we've come a long way as a society and as a country, but I would say that the recent Black Lives Matter movement is evident that there are still racial injustices on an institutional level and things need to change. But we can't change something if we don't know and aren't aware of the history of it and how it continues to perpetuate itself. And I think that it's important I think you're right, it's important to recognize that it really is a systemic problem.
Can I go off on a tangent a little bit? A week or two ago, there was an article in the Panagraph about different historic places in this country that would be interesting to visit. And I thought, I'd like to go here, I'd like to go there, but I don't want to drive all over the country. I'm too old to do that. So I wrote to WILL Public Radio and Peoria Charter Coach and suggested that they set up tours to some of these areas. And I listed them, like Brian Stevenson's place. In Birmingham, Alabama, there's a lot of stuff, including the Birmingham jail where Martin Luther King wrote some of his famous works. And I suggested that they set up tours. This would probably be a year from now, but that's okay, to go and visit some of these places. And I heard right away back from Peoria Charter saying that's a good idea. I'll forward your letter to the right person. And I haven't heard from the other one yet. But if others would write to tour companies, if you're interested in doing that kind of thing and encouraging them, who knows? Maybe they'll do it. I would sign up with the first one I saw, I think. So my little spiel.
That was a great idea. Thanks for doing that. And thanks for mentioning it. Yeah.
Well, I thought this is all local people. And I know some of you, including you, Claire. Our kids used to play soccer together years ago.
Yeah.
I lived a couple blocks from you. Of course, I know Mary Ann. So anyway, I just thought that would be a great thing to do.
Yeah. And if it takes a year to put it together, nobody's going anywhere right now anyway, so.
That's right, that's right. But one of my friends has been to Brian Stevenson Center and she said how great it was and that she would go again. And I thought, well, let's just see what I can do. So let's hope.
in preparation for this session that we're having now, I went to the website for the Equal Justice Initiative and was looking at information about their museum and their memorial there. And it was, yeah, it was really, it made me want to go. It definitely did.
You go with me.
Okay, all right.
Got a
We
deal.
just consider it to be a community trip. So as soon as we get the dates, we'll all
There you
go.
go. And my book group will all go too. So we'll fill the bus.
Well, you know, the YWCA could sponsor it.
Hear that, Tasha?
I heard it. We'll have to look
I don't
into
care
that.
who
I'll get back
sponsors
to you on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe
I just-
promote it, might be more financially feasible, but.
Right.
That's- yeah.
Clear.
I think too, like, we talk about the Reconstruction and things like that, and I wasn't educated on it either. Like, I know it because I've, took it upon myself to learn about it. But if we started that at just a very basic early level, and I feel like that's what we're missing. I think that's the case with sex education. I think it's the case with racial injustice, that it has to start at that foundation, and we just have to be transparent about it. I think for me and for my colleagues at State Farm, they recently just started really calling, I don't know, not people out on it, but basically saying it is our responsibility, our ethical, moral responsibility to fight systemic racism, acknowledge our past failings, be open about it. And right now we have a lot of associates sharing their personal stories. And what that has really done is, I applaud them for their bravery. It has really opened my eyes to how much I'm surrounded by it. I know that that's the case, but when you hear it from a coworker, a friend, somebody you've worked with for 3 years, that, or 10 years or 30 years, whatever, that, they are, being discriminated against in housing, buying a house just because they're Indian or Black or whatever. It's like, it really strikes home. So in our community, because it is so, at least my world, so very white, when we hear these stories from people, it really makes a difference. And it, also points out the privilege that I have and what I can do about that, and how it's my responsibility to take advantage of that and not dismiss it as, oh, if you just tried harder. That's not try harder. It's systemic. Like you said, we've got 500 years of it in this country, and it just doesn't disappear overnight.
Right.
I also think it's important because I know, like, I'm white, and my privilege is there, and I think about that. There's this concept called gracism. I don't know if you have ever read this book, but it's a really good concept. And essentially it is that we can't control what kind of privilege we get or what we're born into. However, we can use it to the benefit of those who don't have it. And so I think that using our voices and saying, like, this is wrong, this isn't okay. I know there was, I don't know if you guys know who Angel Howard is, but she showed a video of a gentleman who spoke up and used his privilege and said, that's a racist joke. And, I know a minority is going to be the butt of that joke, and that's not okay with me. And I think that we need to speak up. We need to say, hey, that's not okay. Or, we need to change the conversation, flip the script, because what did he say? It's not a malign issue. It's not a benign issue. It's a malignant issue. And it is. And so I think that it is important to recognize our privilege, but also to say, like, what can we do with that? How can we benefit those who don't have it? Because we didn't get it. We just got it because we were born into it. But how can we use that to help others who don't have the same privilege?
I agree with you, and I'm grateful that it's not a fight that people have to fight alone, but you see someone that is really suffering or going through something, and you don't say, oh, this is just my problem, or this is just their problem, and I'm going to keep on walking. But you see them struggling, and you say, okay, what can I do to help you to stand? What can I do to help you to amplify your voice? Because maybe you've been screaming so much that your voice is gone. So how can I amplify your voice? All right. So we are getting close to the end, but I kind of wanted to pull out a few more things. Is that okay?
Sure.
I wanted to pull out a few more things, and one of the things that I wanted to pull out is the conversation that he had when he was coming to listen to Rosa Parks and the rest of them. And so I think that that was really, it was a really good part to put into the book. And the reason why is because, again, this is something that people of color have faced for many years. When it comes down to just the system keeping them down, this, that, and another. And so she asked him what he did, and without even thinking about it, he did word vomit. And he was just like, we do this, and I want to do this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And before he realized it, Miss Carr was looking at him like, what's going on? And so, but then when he took a breath, the response of Rosa Parks was, you're going to be tired, tired, tired. And so bringing that back to the bus and how everybody assumed that Rosa Parks did not get up to her seat because she was physically tired, but it was more so she was systemically tired, right? That was the reason why she didn't get up. But she said, you're going to be tired, tired, tired. And the response was, that just means you have to be brave, brave, brave. And so if we can take away one big thing today is the work that a lot of us do, it does make us tired, tired, tired. But we do have to be brave, brave, brave. So I really love that. And I think that being able to have somebody that has a great impact on other people's lives and was a big influence to say that, but then also to turn it around and say that even though you're going to be tired, let's push past the tiredness. Let's push past every single battle that you've lost, because we still have a war to win. So even beyond the tiredness, let's continue to be brave. Anybody else have anything else to say? Okay, well, what I like to do at the end is I just want to give you a few more books. If you're into books, if you like audio books, these are a few other book recommendations, and I'll put the slides up. Give me 1 second. Sorry, my screen is not, oh, there it is. All right, so the two that are highlighted, these are actually clients of Bryan Stevenson, and these are their stories of how they were exonerated or how they were redeemed. And then the circumstantial evidence, this is Pete Early, and this is basically the breaking down of the Walter McMillian case. And so I definitely recommend these. And then I can't remember who mentioned it, but definitely the new Jim Crow laws is a good read as well. Hannah, I can get that for you in just a minute.
Thank you.
No problem. I don't know it right offhand, so I'm going to look it up for you. So that is Michelle Alexander.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. right, does anybody else have anything else, or does everybody have the books down? It's not mandatory, I promise, just suggestions. All right, can we end it with, I know that we've been over it, but what was your biggest takeaway from Just Mercy? If we can end it with you guys giving me your biggest takeaway from Just Mercy, or one of the stories that had an impact on you, and that's how we can end it.
I was impacted by the number of lives he touched with his work and directly in getting more people who work for him, and now the immensity of the organization. And it all started with one guy who really kind of didn't know what he was doing when he was going through college or what he was going to do. And wow, where would we be without him? Some of these guys would be dead.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I agree with you. I do. And it's still going. It's not just, it didn't
Oh,
stop
yeah.
this book.
Yeah.
And so it kept going. And that is definitely amazing in itself. It's still going. And that it continues to grow.
I think I was really struck by the information about children in adult prisons, because honestly, I didn't even know that was a thing. I mean, I knew a lot of the things he talked about, you know, I knew at least that those existed, but that I did not know about. And I found that, I was glad that he's doing some work around that, because that was truly, it was all horrifying, but that particularly horrified me.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Claire, because for the most part, we know that there's juvenile detention centers, so we automatically assume that kids get in trouble and they go to juvenile detention centers. But for it to, you know, really, really sink in, and then even the further investigation of it still being 23 states that try them as adults. They have that opportunity to try them as adults. So thank you for sharing that. And I agree with you. That was a big impact.
One of the things that really stuck with me, I'm just going to read this brief quote. He said, "The opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. The true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned."
I agree with you. I that was heavy for me. That was heavy for me because it goes beyond poverty. It goes beyond poverty because when we seek justice, we don't seek justice just in the criminal justice system. We seek justice when it comes down to housing. We seek justice when it comes down to equal employment. We seek justice when it comes down to having a voice. It's beyond the criminal justice system. We seek justice worldwide. And so I definitely agree with you that that was a big impact. Thank you for sharing, Mary.
I would also say that's my biggest takeaway. You know, that quote is just very impactful. And I think that we need to seek justice on all those areas and fight on behalf of those who don't have the same privileges we do.
All right. Anyone else want to share? Okay, well, I definitely thank you guys for reading the book. I thank you guys for spending lunch hour with me and talking about Just Mercy. And I hope
Thank you.
you enjoy the rest of your day. And if I can say one more thing, I'll just say, just be brave, brave, brave. Have a good day, guys.
Thank you so much.
No problem.